like when you look at the Quran and how like exact and like 100% is with like no contradictions.
It's not 100%. You're either lying or you're ignorant again, because
Lying?
even your Muslim sources,
Lying?
yeah, either you're lying or ignorant. How many qiraat of the Quran are there? Let's see how much you know. Qiraat, Arabic versions of the Quran that still exist to this day, that are not identical.
There's only one.
No, there isn't. Then you see, you're so ignorant. You don't know. Don't take my word for it. You have at least 14 qira'at, 14 versions of the Arabic Quran still in circulation today. I'll just name you two. I'll name you two, Hafs and Warsh.
All right, I want to say something on that. Okay, if that's true, then how comes Muslims read the Quran in the same language and in the same way when they're praying?
No, they don't. What the Muslims are reading today is the 1924 Cairo edition of the Arabic Quran that was standardized by Al-Azhar. You don't have any copies before 1924 that's identical to the Arabic you're reading today. So they're reading a printed Arabic text that was only standardized in 1924. So you're wrong again.
What about the Birmingham copy inside Birmingham University?
The Birmingham copy has variant readings that does not agree with the Quran today. So again, are you on drugs?
No, like.
Okay, so let's try this again. Don't parrot arguments you haven't heard. The extant copies of the Arabic Quran, such as the Birmingham or the Samarkand or Topkapi, they have variations that do not agree, that differ what you have today. So let me repeat again. The Arabic Quran that you read today doesn't go any further than 1924, when Al-Azhar decided to standardize the Hafs version of the Quran, and that's what's being printed in the West. So no, it's not true that all Muslims read the same Quran because it's been the same forever. No, that's not true.
I understand that, but like
today, most Muslims read the Quran in a text that is referred to as the Egyptian edition of 1924. But this is not the only text of the Quran that is read throughout the world. In North Africa, there is a slightly different text that is based on a slightly different reading, mostly corresponding to what we read in the rest of the world, but with some slight variations that do not affect anything that Muslims believe and do not have any major impact on any Muslim practices. And then too, in some parts of Africa, there is another reading of the Quran and a matching manuscript that is prevalent. And here too, we find some slight variations that do not affect Muslim beliefs and do not affect Muslim practices. Without bothering to learn, they have just simply parroted a common way of speaking about the Quran and saying, you know, it's 100% the way it's always been, with no variation or change whatsoever.
Our claim, the Muslim claim, has been for the last 14 centuries that the Quran is absolutely word by word preserved. Word by word.
The sense of complacency that many Muslims have gone around with, thinking that, okay, you know, everything has been preserved dot for dot, letter for letter.
And frankly, you know, the Quran has been preserved, we believe, word for word, letter for letter.
Which actually is not a scholarly way of thinking about the Quran. Our scholars have always known and have always described in our classical books variations.
Have no doubt whatsoever that the Quran has been preserved to the letter.
Many Muslims have gone around with thinking that, okay, you know, everything has been preserved dot for dot, letter for letter.
To the dot and to the sound when we talk about this.
They have just simply parroted a common way of speaking about the Quran and saying, you know, it's 100% the way it's always been, with no variation or change whatsoever, which actually is not a scholarly way of thinking about the Quran. Our scholars have always known and have always described in our classical books variations.
Their Quran is exactly the same.
Variations.
The Quran shall remain uncorrupted, untouched, and unchallenged until the day of judgment.
In academia, there was always a suspicion, you know what, we would really like to find a pre-Uthmanic Quran. We would like to see what was there before Uthman suppressed it all and gave us the one copy which everybody has been running around with now.
The Quran that we read is exactly the one that was given to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Word for word, letter by letter, surah by surah.
Without bothering to learn, they have just simply parroted a common way of speaking about the Quran and saying, you know, it's 100% the way it's always been, with no variation or change whatsoever.
It was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ and preserved word by word, letter by letter, harf by harf, Even the pronunciation is preserved.
Now, in Abu Bakr's time, it was recognized that the Prophet, peace be upon him, died without leaving the Quran in a collected volume. In 1972, a mosque was being repaired in Sana'a in Yemen, and it was found that in the ceiling of the mosque, there were many old documents stashed. And among the documents, some were Quranic copies, and there was one of particular interest that came to be widely referred to now as the Sana'a palimpsest. It's an erased manuscript. So somebody had a manuscript, they wrote on it, then erased it and wrote something else over it. The lower text shows some significant variations. There are variations of words, and sometimes the sequence of a verse, is interchanged there. And the sequence of surahs, chapters, instead of going with the sequence that we have now in our documents, commonly known as the Quran. Academics want to know the history and origins of things. They want to trace developments over time. They want to see changes and evolution and so on. So that became of keen interest to them. But largely Muslims have not had much reason from a religious point of view to be bothered by this.
So I guess the question still stands, right? Like, how is it possible that there was this manuscript there, right? Palimpsest, as you mentioned, when Uthman is purported to have sent out all of these manuscripts that were the official ones to different parts of the world.
Other companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, could have been compiling their own copies as well, or they could have written from their own memories, and that could be at variance with the Uthmanic Codex. If scholars were wondering, and they have wondered, like, what else is there? Like, did something else get suppressed that we would like to know about? Mm-hmm. Well, here, this comes, as a double-edged sword. On the one hand, the sense of complacency that many Muslims have gone around with, thinking that, okay, everything has been preserved dot for dot, letter for letter, which actually is not a scholarly way of thinking about the Quran. Our scholars have always known and have always described in our classical books variations and manuscripts, like, it's read like this by Ubay ibn Ka'b, it's read like this by Ibn Masud, and so on. And in the Codex of Ibn Masud, it was seen to be written like this. In the Codex of Ubay ibn Ka'b, it was seen to be written like this with this or that variation. So these were always known in scholarly circles to have existed. But recently, average Muslims have just simply, without bothering to learn, they have just simply parroted a common way of speaking about the Quran and saying, it's 100% the way it's always been. And they cannot imagine any variations.
So can we feel confident then that the Quran that we have now is preserved accurately from God?
Yes, we could say,